Hello, welcome to My Life in Pixels. My name is Frankie Ward and this is 2019. I can't believe where the last 7 months have gone. It feels like I went full-time as an esports host and started up this podcast a couple of months ago. And actually, no, it's been 9 months maybe. I don't even know. When did I start this? Probably sometime in April, I think. And now it's January. Time is running away from us, or running away with us, I should say. But the esports world and gaming is just more exciting than ever. However, it is a little bit of a kind of downtime in esports. And the last couple of months have been kind of weird for me. I've taken up baking more than ever, or at least more than I have in the last few years. I haven't got out my cupcake tray. That's definitely when you know things have gone around a corner and I'm probably past the point of no return. But I've definitely been whipping up things with my KitchenAid. I even got my sewing machine out today, but the less said about that, the better. I've been chronicling this on Twitter, so if that is something that floats your boat, you want to see my tart citron experiment, then Twitter @GetFrank. But I'm digressing because this is quite a long episode, so I should really get into it. My guest this week is Leigh Deman Smith, and he was the first caster I've ever actually worked with, alongside James Stress O'Leary from Riot Games. And I think working with Leigh and also Joe Miller, who was working behind the scenes on that project for the BBC League of Legends quarterfinals at Wembley in 2015. It was the World's 2015 tournament. That was what really got me started on esports, and without doing that, I don't think I would be here today. In fact, I know I wouldn't be here today. So I was desperate to finally get around to interviewing Leigh. And we didn't talk about the BBC project in detail because I wanted to focus really on how Leigh himself got to where he is today, from being an unpaid but very high skilled player in Battlefield 1942 to being one of the most prolific casters in the industry. Now, this is a Discord interview, so sometimes the audio is going to sound a little bit weird. The usual, it sometimes cuts itself out, so it sounds like I'm a terrible editor. And I'm not saying I'm the best, but Discord makes me sound like I'm the one making the mistakes, but I promise you, hang in there, the audio isn't actually that bad considering. And we did have a really long chat. This is probably the longest episode I've put out there, but Leigh's got 15 or so years to go through. So many games in that time, so I didn't really want to cut this down any more than I had to. So you've got a long conversation, but hey, if you're in London, like me, then you've probably got a long commute. So hopefully Leigh can accompany you and give you a bit of a history lesson in terms of the scene in the UK and around the world, because he's done it all, from League of Legends to FIFA to Overwatch and of course PUBG, which is where my path crossed with Leigh's again when we got to work together at DreamHack Austin in June 2018. And we got to work with each other a few times since then, which is lovely. So let's get into it, guys. The first podcast of 2019. This is My Life in Pixels with Leigh Deman Smith. Go.
What are we talking about? What are we talking about?
We're talking about you. It's like almost like this is your life, Leigh.
This is your life. It's who is it? Is it Tart? No. Who is it? This is your life.
It was hosted by Eamon Andrews from 1955 to
Eamon Andrews, that's it.
No, 1964, because he died in 1987, so he died before I was born. So I think we're both thinking of Michael Aspel.
Eamon Andrews as well. I think I remember that one as well.
He was in the 60s, and you're not that old, because you're a 70s baby, late 70s.
77, yeah, I'm an old man.
Oh no, you're not really. Red Eye's the old man.
That is very true. He's always going to have a few years on me.
Exactly, but you are kind of one of the OGs of esports, and I read that you started out in Battlefield 1942.
You read correctly. You did your research.
I did. I looked at Wikipedia.
Yeah, so I looked at Wikipedia. Yeah, it's pretty much right.
It said though that you were a semi-pro though, Leigh. You weren't quite a pro.
Well, we were the best team in the world, but the problem is there wasn't such a thing as professional gaming then. You weren't paid to play like they are these days. You know, like weren't paid players. But we were in the best team. I was there with OD. And basically, so hold on. So I started off in a team called Relax. right? That was our first
my
Battlefield
God.
1942 team. There was a player in there, so it was a 10v10 Battlefield. So there's a lot of people back then. Obviously, but now we're looking at PUBG terms and stuff. You're talking 100 plus players, so it's not such a big thing. But back then, that would have been the 90s. Yeah, it would have been probably the end of the 90s, start of the 2000s. I think it was Battlefield. And you had to start. A lot of the teams tended to merge to try and get enough players, active players. You need 10-man rosters constantly. So there's a player that you all know he was called then Giliathion. He's now known as Dophos, the NIP manager.
Oh,
so he was in a team with me back then. So we merged two teams. Yeah, Martin. Yeah, indeed.
Oh my God, really? But he looks so young.
I know, right? I've known him for about 18, 19 years, something like that. Yeah. So then I moved on. We were kind of like probably top 5, maybe 6 then at that point. But when I'd played an older game, an even older game called Delta Force, I played with a group of guys. God, what were we even called? Legion Condor we were called. And they happened to be also the top teams of Battlefield. So I went and joined them. And then we merged with these British guys called, I don't know what they were called. I can't remember what they were called. We'd have to ask another old man called OD, because he was in that team. And we merged with them and with some Swedish guys. And we created a team called Dignitas.
So hang on a second. OD famously sold Dignitas a few years ago. And he's got a very nice computer now. Did you see any of OD's millions?
No. I mean, in fairness, like he went on and obviously created the company. I think he was working in London at the time. I don't know what he was doing. His stamp job, his old stamp job he used to do.
I'll have to get him on the podcast sometime.
Obviously at the time we ended up merging and being about probably close to 25, maybe even 30 people. We ended up basically we went on to be one of the best teams in the world. We won, I think, 143 games without losing. The one game we lost, ironically, was when I was traveling to an I series. And I got to the I series and found out they'd lost. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, obviously, me and OD and all that were traveling there because we used to go and play at the I series. And they lost while I was offline. It's quite annoying. But that's where I started commentating, because we merged. We got so many players together. And I used to write, back then it was an old website called Clanbase, which used to run all the tournaments. Pretty much no money involved or anything like that. So that's where we all got together. We used to play in Clanbase. We'd be at the top of that. They'd run a Euro Cup and an Open Cup, Euro Cup being the big one. And we won all of that sort of stuff. And I always used to write these match reports. Basically, it's like text reports on how the game was. And I used to write that. And everybody used to love reading them. So I heard, obviously, there was an old casting company called TSN back then, Team Sportscast Network, which is a bunch of American guys, and they broadcast one of our finals. It wasn't video back then, obviously. It was all just radio on Winamp. And I thought, bloody hell, I could do that. That's good. That sounds really great. And they were just talking about it. And at the time, it was Bridger and Warwick, I think, that commentated it. And Warwick is still around. He still streams. Had a fantastic voice, I think, like proper American. And I think he was a DJ or something like that in America, in Vegas or something like that. So he had the voice for it. And I just thought, that's great, but they don't really know what they're on about in the game. I could do it better. So I kind of came from the traditional caster route, because obviously if you look at all the casters these days, a lot of people either come from, mainly their standard caster route is you come as a color caster. You come as an ex-player into the casting, and that's how most casters tend to perform. And that's exactly how I came about.
What kind of year are we talking about then?
Probably 2001, maybe 2. Somewhere that era, that long time ago.
At least 15 years ago. And so
easily. Yeah, I'm sure it's like it was Battlefield 1942, which I think is 01, something like that. So I started broadcasting it, and I started using Winamp, and I got to know the TSN guys, and it was Game Sports Network, which was the European one as well. And I started doing that, and I needed a co-caster. Happened to be another Brit that obviously everybody knows these days, that was also playing for N Brigade, they were called, which actually had a couple of DICE employees in it. And N Brigade were probably about also top 5 team, very good team, and obviously got to know them, the UK guys, and it was, of course, Joe Miller, who was, 15, 16 back then.
Oh, was he
young
still as
lad.
hairy, or was he like yet to
He
grow
had shaven
a
head,
beard?
England top on when I first met him. And I had no idea he was so young. I thought he was like, because he was drinking beer at the bar. So I just assumed 18.
Goes with the shaven head, that.
Yeah. He was a big, broad northern lad. So he was 16.
So is that how you guys met then?
That's exactly how we met. Yeah, we met online, obviously, to start with. Then we met offline at the multiplayer event, the iSeries events. And then we started commentating together. We started getting it together and building a rapport up. So we've been casting together for, like I say, literally decades.
How do you actually pluck up the courage to ask a fellow caster to, go steady, to build that relationship?
To go steady. It just happened that way. It's just, obviously, we always had similar interesting games. I think that's how it worked out. He went on to actually do outside of Battlefield, he went on to do a lot more in the early days. He went on to do Quake for CPL, which was the world tour thing they did. He did Painkiller. They did Painkiller tour back then, world tour. And he went on to do that. I think that was like when he was 17, 18. He was going around the world and doing all sorts. He did MTV with Warwick, actually the guy that I first heard commentating Battlefield. That would have been 2003, maybe 2004, perhaps somewhere around there, long time back. So he went on to do a lot more. And then I kind of, when Battlefield was on, I basically said, I'm probably going to disappear because there was an MMO coming out and I'm a massive MMO addict back then. I was. I think it was probably EverQuest or I think it was EverQuest. It was probably EverQuest that drew me away. And I just said, look, I'm probably going to be playing this game. And that's it. Disappeared from casting for 2 years. I did.
2 years? You just disappeared into an MMO?
I disappeared down the rabbit hole into an MMO. Actually, what brought me out of it was Supreme Commander, which was an RTS game that I played just online with friends and stuff like that. I just got playing with it a lot with a group of friends that I've always played with. And I think we'd gone to an iSeries event. And I was playing in the tournament. I got knocked out in the semi-finals. It was a 2v2 tournament, knocked out in the semi-finals. And I'd said Joe happened to be there because this was when QuadV had sort of been born and was starting to become a thing, like 2004, 2005 era. And I said to him, I was like, I'll help you cast the finals if you want, because obviously I knew Joe. Joe then was now a director of that with Red Eye, with Oliver Aldridge, who you know, and Stuart Saw, who you know from Twitch.
Yes, Tosspot. They were this will know as a caster, of course, as well.
Tosspot, yeah, that's what he was known as a caster, because he ended up being one of my co-casters for many years as well. But we'll get to that. I've got a long.
I do want to do just a little point of clarification for anyone who's listening, though. QuadV. Well, actually, you should probably get onto what QuadV were, if that's okay, because I know not everyone knows right now who they are, but back then they kind of were really the center of UK esports, and now it's run by Oliver Aldridge, who, when I was a producer at Twitch, often led production for me as the director, and I often get to work with him now. He either does infrastructure or directs me, so it's
he was at GLL. He was at the GLL
yes,
season 3.
He was doing cables.
He totally threw me.
He
was
always
doing the networking.
Looks so unhappy to see me. I think it's a joke. It's because maybe I nicked his face.
He just always looks unhappy.
You know what? I think he does it deliberately now, because I see he makes a joke about me being there and then he smiles. I have genuinely seen Oliver Aldridge smile at least 5 times.
He smiles, yeah. But yeah, back then it was. I think it was good. Like I say, QuadV started up as like this casting company, because back then it used to be the old TSN. They kind of went to the wayside. What was DJ Wheat's? It was ITG was DJ Wheat's one, which is Marcus Graham now.
Yes,
a lot of people know him, obviously does the Twitch. Yep, your boss, yeah. And sort of that was the old rivalry. It was TSN and ITG. They were the two rival companies. And they kind of both sort of faded away. And QuadV was created with multiplayer actually in the background, as a lot of the broadband support. They offered to cover the broadband costs, etc. Because back then, it's not like Twitch. Anyone can log on to Twitch now. Back then, all the broadband had to be paid for by someone. Someone somewhere had to pay for all of the bandwidth costs, etc. So, which actually ended up running into multiple tens of thousands sometimes of some of the events. So it wasn't cheap. So you had to have these sponsors, etc. that did it. And QuadV was created as the broadcasting front side, and multiplayer, I believe, was the back side and stuff like that. And that's how it all came about with Red Eye, with Oliver Aldridge, which was Jester. Tosspot came on a little later, and Joe was there as well, Joe Miller. And I eventually became a director in that a little bit later on. But yeah, my first sort of comeback was Supreme Commander, going back to that. And that's where I'd get back to Joe. And I was like, hey, Joe, I'll join you casting it, because clearly they didn't have a bloody clue. Because if you ever see Supreme Commander, it's one of these games you can zoom right in and it looks awesome, but you can also zoom right out into the sky and it's literally triangles, squares, and circles. And if you don't know what's going on, it's almost impossible to follow. It's like fantastic system, but it never got carried through.
I got to sometimes know watching StarCraft, Leigh. I will.
Yeah, well, actually, funny you should mention that, because I got to know TLO, the little one, from Supreme Commander before StarCraft 2 came about. So that's how I knew him before, and he tried to pull me into StarCraft 2 commentary, and I didn't really want it that way. But I went on. Obviously, it was my first. I'd met Red Eye back when I did Battlefield casting. He was doing Quake casting back then. We were kind of almost like rival, didn't really like each other much, because everybody has egos back then. They still do these days, a lot of people.
I was waiting to say that.
Yeah, I mean, when you've been in the industry long enough, you don't really give a shit. But but in the early days, when you're new to it, you're like, oh, he's a rival, and stuff like that. But yeah, so we kind of eventually got to know each other a bit better. And I think it was that tournament that I also met another one of your old bosses, Jason Fletcher, who was working for Packard Bell at the time, and Call of Duty 4 was just being trialed or was just coming out. I think it was like a demo test thing. And everyone played it, and it was just like, oh my God, this game is amazing. So I moved into that.
You say you became a director at QuadV. So when did you stop being a director? What was your next move? Was that when you went to Riot?
Yeah, so I did a lot of Call of Duty 4 for 2 to 3 years, with mainly with Tosspot as my co-commentator in that. A bit with Joe and a bit with Red Eye. Joe went off to do Fnatic, so he left QuadV. To join Fnatic. He became a general manager at Fnatic. So I then joined QuadV as a director there, and it ended kind of at the end of Call of Duty 4, really. I kind of just, again, stopped casting, because at the time I'd only ever cast games that I really enjoy, and that's what I try and always do. So back then it was Battlefield 1942, it was Supreme Commander, moved into Call of Duty 4. Call of Duty 4 was kind of dying off, because what Activision are like, they tend to roll out a new Call of Duty every year. COD 5 was an absolute pile of shit, so nobody really wanted to move into it. So I ended up just sort of stopping again, really. I did a little bit of Team Fortress 2 for a while. I think I did a PC Gamer event and stuff like that. But after that, it kind of wasn't really much. I'd done a little bit of CS 1.6 here and there. But outside of that, I just I basically moved into my working world. It was just like, yeah, okay, it was a hobby. It was a fun hobby. It never paid money back then. You never really earned money off it at all. It was all for the love. So it got to the point where it's just like, look, I need to buy my own house. I need to do, responsible things.
So what were your responsible things, though, Leigh? What was your day job?
Buying a house. I mean, that's quite a big responsibility, really.
But what was your day job at the time while you were?
So I was a web developer. I'd worked for a company in the UK called City Electrical Factors, who my brother still works for. My mother had worked for them for ever. My brother's still there as one of the head office accountants. He's quite high up in the company. And I was a web developer for the company. So I'm talking like early days when nobody really knew what a bloody virus checker was and stuff like that. So I'd have to install virus checkers, started developing their intranet, etc. like that. And now obviously they've got a whole building full of people that does the same thing nowadays. But back then it was like nobody really knew what the bloody hell this was all about. So I did a lot of that. And I worked there for, God, the best part of 11 years, 10 years, 11 months. I think I was there in total. Before, so a lot of it that was going on with the QuadV, etc., I was still working full-time job, which you had to do back then. And I guess a lot of commentators that are probably coming through into the industry are also working full-time jobs, and they're kind of doing it on the side. And the trigger really for me to leave was, as you say, was Riot. It was 2012. When I left that company. So I'd worked there for 11 years. Yeah. So from Battlefield, basically the beginning of Battlefield, all the way through Call of Duty, all the way through all that stuff, I was working full-time at CEF. And I was having to use my day's holiday to go and do these events. So when Riot came around, when League of Legends came around in, I think, started 2010, I was still working for QuadV, still doing we were doing events called World Cyber Games then, which was like, I did 09, 10, I think 11. I did 3 years of that, which was like Los Angeles. One of them was in Korea. They used to bounce around. It was an event held by Samsung. I don't think it ever exists anymore, the World Cyber Games. And it used to have lots of games. It used to have Counter-Strikes, etc. And League of Legends was in there for 2010. That was I'd been playing it a lot with friends, again, same friends that had got me into it. And so I'd been playing with a lot of top teams and top players, etc., in the UK. So Snoopy, etc., stuff like that. I got to know all these guys, and it got to the point. It was like, well, shit, I can't actually compete because I'm going to be commentating this damn thing. But it was good because I knew the game well. So again, I went to Red Eye and it's like I was still with QuadV. I was like, look, I know this game really well. At the time, Matt Hovin was there as well, Acebec, and we were all sort of discussing who was going to cast it. Because when you have these WCGs, it's not like you have an event; it's one game, right? These days. Back then, that event had probably about 20 games in it, and there'd be about 5 of us casting it, and we'd just have to spread as much as thin as you could do. So you had to cover a lot of games. So that was my first dip in the waters with League of Legends sort of thing. And then from then on, I kind of ended up doing, what were they? MLGs, IPLs, IEMs, ESLs, obviously events, the IEMs. That was really my first big step. Was again WCG. Joe had come along to it, and I'd said to him at a previous event, which was Sturmy's event. Sturmy that runs Face It. His event in Vienna. God, what was it? What did he call it? The Ultimate Gaming Championships. That was it. It was there was a number of people there actually. It was a weird event. It was 2008, 2009, somewhere around there, which actually had a lot of top talent on it. If you think these days, there was me and Joe was doing Call of Duty. I think we were casting there. Apollo was there doing StarCraft. That took off. James Harding was there doing Quake. Total Biscuit was there doing StarCraft with Apollo. Sturmy was obviously there doing Quake as well. It was QuadV doing the whole production in the back end. It was such a event like these days that just you wouldn't see that much talent outside of just one game or something like that.
It's so funny though that it was like an epicenter for all these big names and faces that we know so well today. Do you think that at the time when you were doing events like that anyone was aware of how big this thing was going to become?
No, not really. I mean, everybody wanted it, right? It was because this was the time where, like, Paul had done, Red Eye had done the CGS, the Championship Gaming Series. So his ego was like way up in the fucking skies. It was in for DirecTV in America.
Yes. Okay.
He'd been out there for 2 years, and obviously this had all happened. I think it was like 08, 09. So suddenly everyone was like, "Oh, this is going to be a thing." But a lot of it was an interesting one, right? Because that TV series, and I know a lot of companies looked at that, like for example Overwatch League, and think actually some of the stuff they did was really good. But in the industry, like a lot of the esports hardcore, we're just thinking this is horrible, 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 because they've taken, say, a game like Counter-Strike, which is, they changed the rules of the game. They'd shortened the rounds. They'd taken, and it was like, I think they had FIFA. They had a driving game, which was probably a Forza, I guess, one of them maybe. They had Counter-Strike. They had some sort of fighting game as well, I would say. I'm not sure what. But basically, they changed a lot of the rules, and it was like it's very Americanized game show type thing. So from an esports perspective, we were like, this is bullshit. This is what, esports is the homegrown grassroots of gamers and all the rules that were sort of set up, which it now is actually. If you look at all the events, that's kind of what won out, because the gaming show ended up dying out, and sort of esports sort of grew on its own. But at the time, obviously, we were all like, yes, TV picking up these things. This is going to be great. This is the future. And it was kind of like a big swing between like who wanted it to just like, no, because I think Twitch, it wasn't Twitch. It was, it was own TV. Justin TV obviously was a thing. It was just starting, but that was very early days. Own TV was kind of like the gaming channel at the time. So that was just starting to come into its own. So everyone was looking at these obviously things. And now if you look at Twitch, it's like, it's a no brainer. You just stream on Twitch. Whereas at the time, obviously these were just coming through. So we're like, yes, these are actual legit platforms that we can use. We don't need to spend tens of thousands on bandwidth or be on TV. You can get camera crews and all the expensive part that comes with it. So it was starting to step up. So that's where it all sort of grew through. And that was the exact tournament that I said to Joe, next time you do League of Legends with ESL, because he was at ESL now, give us a call and I'll do it with you, because he had some German guy, and I don't know who it was, but God, he was awful. His English was terrible. He didn't know the game. So I said, Joe, please just give me a ring. And that's where, again, me and Joe went back to casting, and that's how it all began again. God, that would have been 2010, I think.
And so 2 years later, you end up doing your 24 interviews to officially join Riot.
No. So the 24, that was a different time. So the first time I joined Riot was based off, because I'd just done, like I say, all the IPLs, the MLGs, etc. So I'd done the circuit, like we'd just done with, say, like Counter-Strike is right now. It goes here, there, and everywhere. League of Legends used to be the exact same. It used to do all the Intel Extreme Masters events, selling out these arenas, the MLG events, the IPL events. And obviously League of Legends had their Season 2 as well event, which I went and did. And that was actually the cutoff point for me as an employee, because I'd gone to do that. I think I'd done all these IPLs, and then Riot asked me, it's like, oh, we want you for the World Finals. Yeah, great, brilliant. Yeah, we need you for 2 weeks in Los Angeles. I was like, I'd got like 4 days left of holiday out of the 25 days or whatever it is you get for normal holiday. So I'd had to go to my brother, who at the time was like, Steve, I need to leave. I need to either you give me unpaid days, or simply I need to leave, because I'm now earning more, because finally the money was starting to come in, right? I was now earning more from going to do a weekend event at one of these than I was for my month's work. So it got to this sort of cutoff point where I was like, I need to change my job. This needs to become my job, which is obviously a dream, but at the time it was scary as shit, because I'd got a mortgage, I'd got a car, I was a responsible adult. Yeah. So it was scary as hell. So I ended up basically going off to do the World Finals, and then Riot asked me to become a full-time player. Actually, I ended up doing a tweet and just said I need to decide whether I stop completely with esports or go full-time. And that's when Waylon Rosen at the time, who actually is still the director of esports at Riot, reached out to me and was like, right, we're going to pull you on board. And that's when I joined up with them.
So if I get desperate for a job, because I've got quite a free schedule, Deeman, I should just tweet that I'm considering esports.
Well, it was very different back then, because obviously I think I was probably, like, at the time, I'm trying to think how many were actually, freelancers / full-time casters, there really wasn't any. There wasn't many at all. You probably had, because Counter-Strike wasn't really a thing at the time then, because CSGO was in its infancy. 1.6 had died off, so everybody that was doing that had gone. It was really the few guys at ESL, and maybe you got to look at probably Tasis and Artosis that were over in Korea. They were really, that was it. There was probably a handful at best of people full-time in esports as commentators. So it was a big risk in my eyes to be like, oh my God, to go and do this. But yeah, 2012, I think that was, I finally decided to quit. In 2013, I rocked up into Cologne. February 2013, I've been here ever since.
How was that like then, going from a full-time job working with your family to officially being full-time in esports, moving to another flipping country? I guess leaving the mortgaged house and car behind.
Well, I actually still have that.
You have the car. You still have the car.
I don't have the car. No, the Pope-mobile, as it was known as back then, is now sold. It was a old Renault Megane, a Renault Scenic rather, or Renault Scenic. So it was dubbed the Pope-mobile because it was the Landmobile that used to be able to take about 6 people.
Yeah, my dad's got a Picasso, so I think that was the one that came after.
That was probably it. Well, that's the Citroen, right? That's the Citroen one. It's very similar.
Okay, yeah, sorry. The market equivalent, I should say, Leigh. I'm terrible at cars.
They're both French. It's fine. That's fine.
Exactly.
But yes. So I sold the car, but I've still got the apartment. Actually, I rented out still in the UK. But yeah, that was a big move. It would helped that I'd done a number of ESL events. For the last 2 years prior to that. So I've been to Gamescom a bunch of times. I'd done the IEM events. Back then it was actually, ironically, it's where StarLadder is right now in Kiev. IEM did events there in that same venue with the StarLadder guys and the Cyber Arena. They'd been around the world. IEM, I'd done a bunch of places with them. So I knew a lot of the ESL stuff. So at least there was people I knew here. Obviously Joe, back then, Jason Kaplan came on board as well. So I got to know him. KL Aris was there. Obviously, I already knew Carmack and all this stuff, and Apollo was there. So there was quite a group of people here that I knew, and we were obviously very social at the time. So yeah, God. So the first few nights here, my God, I was a mess because I'd come from like being full-time employees, go down the pub maybe once a week, with my brother and catch up and do all this sort of stuff, to come in here to basically a group of bloody party animals, going back to being a college student. Effectively, I nearly died. It was like that much going on.
Who was the biggest party animal out of everyone?
Oh, you know who it is.
Was it J-Cap?
Jason, get out of here. It's Joe Miller.
Oh my God, of course. I'm sorry. Skinhead with the pint of beer, age 15.
Jason's not a party animal in any way, shape, or form.
I'm just saying that because I feel like if I say something that makes him sound cool on the podcast, he'll start being nice to me.
Doubtful.
That's a good one, guys. I don't think he's said maybe 2 nice things to me my entire life, but I digress. Has Joe calmed down, though?
No
comment. I mean, we both need him to hire us, so we have to do nice
comments.
No,
actually, Joe's my agent now, obviously, so he's moved on from being a caster. But yeah, that was the start of the Riot period for me. That was obviously, I ended up doing 2, 3, 4 years of League of Legends, which obviously grew me in popularity a lot. Despite the fact I had done all these games before it. A lot of people nowadays do know me for League of Legends.
That was the big time. So did you start to get recognized? Did the fame creep up on you?
Yeah, especially in the height of season 3 and 4. A lot around Cologne as well. On
in
trams
Cologne?
And all sorts of bloody
really?
weird. Yeah, well, season 4 at Gamescom was a bloody nightmare because that was when they had this huge stage setup, which cost a lot of money. They had this huge stage setup, and that was the time when, you've been to Gamescom, you know how crowded it gets, and how much of a nightmare it is going to the toilet, right?
Yeah, even as a woman this year, maybe it was the hall I was in doing the Omen challenge with PUBG this year, but I had to queue for the loo, and I'm not used to that.
So the problem was that because Riot's basically had half one of the halls, like effectively like Blizzard do, they have like this whole hall. Well, they had the massive community booth and then the massive stage area. And so, but consequently, half the hall and the toilets at the end were all League of Legends people. So I actually needed stage manager. I don't know if you ever met Alex Pearlock, stage manager Alex. He used to be ESL stage manager. Basically, him and two other Riot staff basically made a cordon for me to go to the toilet. I was like escorted like some sort of bloody rock star or something stupid. And also into the point, you go into the toilet and then they create like this area so you can pee.
Fuck you. Oh my God. I actually had to escort the biggest streamer in Poland to the loo. Well, or at least at one point, basically, this guy called Izak 000 is his
Izak,
name.
yeah.
Yeah, he's such a nice guy. He's massively famous in Poland. It's insane. And so I was at Poznan Game Arena, this Polish gaming event. I think it's their biggest one. And he needed to go to the loo, but his security weren't around. And so I ended up like basically just automatically following him and then standing outside the loo and then having to keep all these Polish kids back. But I don't speak Polish, so all I could say was "iż," which means sort of back off. I was like "iż." I just guarded the loo.
Back off,
5'4" of me. Yeah, until he came out again, and yeah, that was an insane experience.
Yeah, he just Counter-Strike casting, doesn't he?
Yeah. And he's got his own Counter-Strike team called Izako Boars, and they also
Izako Boars. They were in PUBG as well for a bit.
Yes, they were. They didn't qualify though for Pro League, did they?
No, they kind of. Actually, I don't know what's happened to them. They were really good. It used to be Hasari, but anyway.
Well, fingers crossed. Anyway, sorry, digress. We'll talk about PUBG in a bit. So, sorry. You're getting recognised. You're at Gamescom. You're having VIP treatment in the loos.
VIP treatment in the loo? That sounds a bit dodgy.
Cologne
bingo starts here.
Yeah, Cologne is, it's, I don't know, Leigh.
Well, yes, I was escorted around, but that was the height of it. And actually, that was also the year I left. That was the same. Well, it was kind of like it was getting like CS:GO was taking off, and I was like I say, I've always been involved in multiple esports. So Riot was they decided they were moving to Berlin. They hadn't announced it at the time, which I wasn't too happy about. So I decided to leave after I wasn't that happy going around doing the worlds. Like we did worlds in it was Asia, Asia and Korea and that lot, and I just wasn't as happy as I was in previous years. So I decided to move on to ESL. So because I'd talked to them and they were happy to take me on, so I was like, oh, perfect, because I was going back to it. However, little did I know ESL was obviously going through big changes at the time. They were being bought out.
Oh, yeah, of course. Sorry about MTG.
Yes, which I obviously didn't know about. I was still, for me, ESL was still that company of friends that I'd got to know back through 2012, 2014, that sort of period of a lot of people knowing. Turns out that a lot of people were either leaving or going to America, or various stuff was happening, sort of thing. So the company had changed a lot. So what I walked into was probably not what I was expecting. I think it's safe to say. Certainly wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I was expecting to go into. We were also hopeful at the time we were going to get the broadcast rights for China, for League of Legends China. So me and Joe would have ended up casting again with Jason and doing the China event, which would have been basically, we would have gone in the studios, obviously from, I think it was like 11 a.m. To probably about 3 p.m. and broadcast the China stuff. Ended up Riot took it in-house and did it themselves and used, ironically, ESL Australia to do the broadcast. But yeah, we wanted to do it from Cologne, which would have been absolutely great. I think I'd have loved it if we'd have done that, but it didn't happen. So I then moved on to basically saying, right, well, the biggest problem was if you weren't within Riot, you really weren't doing League of Legends. So I was like, okay, I probably should stop broadcasting League of Legends now. And I moved on to Counter-Strike.
Was that hard, parting from League?
Yeah, definitely, no doubt about it, because it was the game I absolutely loved. So very, very hard to sort of cut yourself off and say, right, I'm gonna move on, because I've always cast games that I've loved. So to not suddenly be doing it on a week in, week out was tricky. It was a very tough choice to make.
But it sounds like CS was therefore more of a strategic move rather than a move for love.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why it just didn't work for me in Counter-Strike. I enjoyed casting Counter-Strike, but I didn't love casting Counter-Strike. I think that's what it is. Or more to the point, I wasn't in love with the community. Whereas League of Legends, I could take it or leave it, all the stuff that came because it was the good with the bad. So it was a tricky one, really. And obviously Counter-Strike, I could see it becoming this giant behemoth that it was. And I tried to get involved. My problem was, or certainly in retrospect, the problem was not my problem, but it was overall problem. I was getting pushed into doing these finals because I'd come over as this big commentator from League of Legends. So my social media footprint had grown and all this lot. So I was getting basically thrust into the finals, which obviously at the time I was happy to do. But in retrospect, it's a bloody horrible idea. Because I was getting wedged in between Anders and Semler a lot of the time because they were the big dogs then. So consequently, the community would see me coming in as this guy that's basically splitting up Anders and Semler, the community favorites. And obviously, I would get the backlash off the back of that. So at the time, obviously, you didn't see it, but now you do. You see how much of a horrible idea that was in retrospect, because obviously all the backlash goes to me. And ESL at the time were also getting lots of kind of not a lot of love in Counter-Strike at the time. Obviously nowadays they're pretty much the darlings of it, but back then it was a tricky period.
So how did you work your way out of CS:GO, and how did you find a game to fall in love with again?
With CS:GO?
After CS:GO, so when
after it.
Overwatch
I actually
you moved into after CS?
It was Overwatch actually, which I did enjoy. That was a good, fun game with friends. I think that's the best way of describing Overwatch. I never got into the competitive side of it because I've never since I'm an old man these days. I can't compete with the bloody flick shots and stuff like that you need to do in the top levels. But I enjoyed playing it with friends and subs and stuff like that at the time. So that's where I got into that. And obviously I ended up casting that with Jason and Mitch. So we ended up doing Mitch, Uber. We ended up obviously doing the Overwatch Atlantic, what was it called? The Atlantic series or Atlantic something we did. Which was, so we ended up doing basically casting through the bloody night. We were doing Europe and America. So we would do Europe on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then America on Thursday, Friday, or something like that. It was so obviously we're talking American times. We're in the studio broadcasting until 5, 6 a.m. Long days, which accumulated into the big grand finals at Gamescom. And that was absolutely bloody great. Consequently, we then went on to do the Overwatch World Cup at Blizzard and had a great old time. And that's obviously when the Overwatch League was just starting to be talked about. Sadly, didn't get involved in it at the start.
But you would have had a really long wait if you had got involved with it. Because that was 2016.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we knew it was coming about, obviously internally, but yeah, it was like a year later that it actually. In fact, it was a year and a bit later, right, that it started up. So consequently, I think it was like November. So shortly after Overwatch World Cup, a DreamHack event came about, and Jason and Mitch were doing it, but I was not. And Blizzard had made the basically choices, which kind of confused me a little bit because obviously I'd just done all of Overwatch, the Atlantic Showdown. I'd done the World Cup. I was casting with Mitch, and then suddenly I wasn't. And Mr. X was casting with Mitch, and it was like, okay. So I ended up doing, because I couldn't do Overwatch that event, I ended up doing FIFA with Joe again. Now I'd done on and off the FIFA World Cup finals, which actually came out the blue in 2014, I want to say, something like that, when me and Joe were happened to be upstairs. One of the guys had done a product, and it was like the German qualifiers or something like that. And it was quickly like, Jesus Christ, we need 2 casters tonight. Anyone that can cast FIFA? Me and Joe were like, sure, it's football, easy. So off we went down. Just turned out that Adrian, who was at the time, he's one of the head FIFA guys, like not EA Sports, but actual FIFA. And he was down there. And obviously the community feedback was great because suddenly they're like, oh my God, it's Deman and Joe casting FIFA. This is amazing. And then suddenly, boom, next thing, we're off to Munich to cast the finals. And then we'd done New York after that. So when we ended up doing the FIFA DreamHack, me and Joe, it was just like, yeah, sure, me, Dro, and Momo, who now works for, does all the Call of Duty World League, Phil Whitfield, aka Momo. He ended up doing that with us. And after that event, after DreamHack, obviously I was miffed that I didn't get to do Overwatch League. I wasn't doing this thing. I hadn't been spoke to. So I was like, oh, this is really annoying. I fell into FIFA, basically, obviously already doing stuff. And then that DreamHack event, we immediately had the call from Brent Koenig, who's the commissioner at EA, and was basically like, oh, we love that stuff. Next thing, I'm on a bloody plane here, there, and everywhere the following year doing all the FIFA events, because obviously that suddenly took off, and me and Joe were doing all that suddenly.
And that's really cool though as well, because I remember when we did the BBC Wolves coverage where Joe was behind the scenes and you were on screen. The community were desperate to see you and Joe back together on screen. We made it happen for one of the links. So with you two coming back together for FIFA, it's like the perfect timing, and it's the perfect game for you guys. But
it fits well because it's really actually Joe's still casting it, but I'm not, because I don't fit the the style of the show. I feel like that was the phrase that was used.
Are they going for more lads? People
I think so, probably.
Esports?
Yeah. I'm too much of an old man, I think. It happens. It's entertainment industry. We all know it happens.
Yeah, I give myself 2 years, mate, in this industry.
Well, that's the thing with females, right? You have it even worse than we do.
Well, I think apparently I look younger than I am, so we'll just kind of ride that train.
You're gonna wing it as long as you can.
Yeah, putting the sun lotion on, etc.
You're gonna turn up to one of the events completely orange.
Yeah, no, not orange, not fake tan, Leigh. Sun
I'm
lotion.
fantastic.
Oh my God, no! Can you imagine? But after a FIFA, then along comes PUBG, I guess, because that's kind of where our paths start crossing again. Because I obviously left Twitch, started doing bits and pieces.
So there was a funny bit in between. I'd done when was it? 2015, perhaps. When was the first TwitchCon?
I'm not actually sure. It's before I was 2014, maybe.
Yeah, it might be 2014. I did H1Z1 Invitational.
Yeah, so the second one of those was at 2017 because I was at that TwitchCon. So it
must have been 2016 then.
Yes. So I think the first one was 2015 actually. I think the third one was 2017 because that's the one I went to. Yeah,
I did the H1Z1 Invitational. I got replaced by this little guy called Nade Shot afterwards. But the first year I did it. It was me, Golden Boy, and Jimmy Wisehunt that did it. And obviously that was when Brendan Green was there with H1Z1, and we did the Invitational with him. And it turned out like, obviously I basically turned up, all the streamers were there. So I knew a lot of the streamers already. Through various contacts and stuff. A lot of them knew me and I knew them. So sort of got to know them guys while they were doing practices. And I got to know Brendan really well then because we were pretty much the same age. And we would kind of have the same interests. We were just like, neither of us had really been in San Francisco much. So we ended up just going out to dinner every night. Just trying out different restaurants around San Francisco for the 3 or 4 nights we were there. And then so that's where I got to know Brendan from. So fast forward on a year, I think. I was then doing Overwatch at IEM in Korea in Seoul. I invited Brendan along because he wanted to. Always really wanted an esports for his games. So he came along to the stadium. It wasn't a great event, in all honesty. But back then, obviously, he was then working in Seoul and developing PUBG. PUBG was in its closed alpha. I was there with all the StarCraft casters, the League of Legends casters, and the Overwatch casters. Actually, no, the Overwatch casters were all there as well. Yeah. And he was almost peddling his wares. He's like, anyone want a code for my game? As a thing, obviously back then, because he wanted like players, trying to get players to play it. Ended up, he sneakily paid for the dinner because he'd got his money in from selling H1Z1
money, yeah.
Yeah. He'd obviously invested in PUBG and it was going well. And he was really happy with his life, actually. He was like, his life was going really well. And obviously now, if you look at that, it's like crazy how back then it was like trying to get people to play it. Now, and I think it must have been a month or 2 months afterwards, everyone was coming up to me like, can you get more codes off Brendan? Can you get more codes off Brendan? Because suddenly, obviously, PUBG started to take off and everybody wanted a piece of it.
How do you get into the esports of PUBG? What was your first event? Was it as far back as Gamescom 2017?
No, I was actually really annoyed with Stuart Ewan. If you're out there, Stuart, I know you are. He works for Ubisoft now, I think he does. It was him that put Richard and Lauren together for it, because he knew they were dying to do PUBG. They were loving it and that lot. Had absolutely no clue that I'd gone and done the first invitational. Had no clue that I was playing PUBG. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Because my first PUBG event was outside of doing the internal. I used to do the internal ESL scrims. Was probably IEM Oakland, I guess. I think it was.
Yes, and that was my first PUBG event.
Yeah, it was when you were there. Yeah, because that was like the first big one, really. There were 20 player. Obviously, you were there doing your
20 players. You mean 80 players? 20 teams.
No, it was a 20 team. Yeah,
it was a
big 20 team. It was crazy. It was a 20 team tournament, and obviously it was a horrific lag fest. I think that was probably the one
20
only.
to 30 FPS at points. It was every time the cars, people jumped into cars to rotate.
That was it. Yeah. Well, it wasn't correctly done then. Obviously they've fixed a lot of it since then, but yeah, back then it was pretty hard. But then again, saying that, right? I always try and say this to the players that are always like moaning about various bugs with PUBG and whatever games. I just think what League of Legends was like in its early stage, it was horrific. Even during the LCS, you'd have bugs where I don't know whether you know League of Legends at all, but there's an item in it called the Black Cleaver, and now it's a unique item, but at the time it wasn't. And you'd have people stacking like boots and 5 black cleavers, and they'd just go in spinning like with Garen spinning, and it would just kill everyone. It was like, and this was in the actual league. Wow. It was like, guys, this is not the first time it's happened. PUBG is experiencing these issues, but every game has gone through this. Like, think of Dota tournaments where a patch, Jesus Christ, Fortnite the other day for WSOE patch dropped the day of the tournament. Same thing happened for Dota 2. I remember patch dropping the day of the tournament. This happens in all the games. This is not unique. Yeah. So it's funny, like across the years, obviously everyone believes it's like, oh, this is a disaster. How could this happen? It's like, guys, this has happened countless times for every game.
So when did you decide PUBG is what I want to be focusing on? Because you're pretty much permanent fixture on the PUBG scene, give or take 1 or 2 events, but that's just PUBG, isn't it? We can't do all of them. So.
Well, PUBG was I looked and learned from my mistakes of the past, and my dog's having a shit. I looked and learned the mistakes of the past, and that was with, say, Counter-Strike. I was obviously thrust in there and chucked into the big games. And I thought, I'm not going to have that. I'm not having that again. I'm doing grassroots, every community type thing I can cast. And that's why for PUBG, I hit it hard online, broadcasting all Oakland qualifiers for 36 hours from home. All qualifiers for Katowice, all qualifiers for PGL. I didn't even go and commentate. all qualifiers online, and then started doing the GLL online stuff, the Bravo divisions. I did Awesome stuff online. I commentated the crap out of it because that's what I did for League of Legends. That's how really the best way to approach for me a game is to basically embed yourself in the community, and you've got to love it to do that, right? You've got to put that many hours in. You've got to love it, but you also get the benefits from it. So, for example, when we have these PELs that are now coming about, and the qualifiers and the PGI qualifiers and stuff like that, I can then tell stories about, this player, he used to play for this team. He tried to qualify in this thing. They're now together as this team. It's all in your head because you've done it. So that's the best way, certainly as a commentator, for me to approach a game, is to basically do bloody everything, carpet bomb the damn industry, and do as much for that game, for the tournaments as you can. And that's how I got the events.
Yeah, and Pro League is coming along, so it's for me, Pro League is such a double-edged sword, because obviously we're seeing right now with the NA Pro League, with MPL, certain rosters certain organizations are dropping PUBG, although hopefully we're seeing Optic Gaming drop their roster, but they are sticking together. And is their team name, is it Why Tempt Fate? That's it. So they're obviously going for qualification, and then I guess they have to find an org once they've qualified, because I think they might need to be part of an org to actually be.
Yeah, I mean, it swings and roundabouts, right? I mean, obviously, I don't know how well a league structure, nobody really knows how well a league structure is going to work for PUBG, because it's very different to all the other tournaments. Obviously you have, for example, League of Legends, you'd have, they're getting all hyped about SK versus Fnatic again, and Origin versus G2 and stuff like that. PUBG don't have that. Obviously, you all have all 16 teams in there. Now, some organizations are approaching it with the thought of, well, when it's Team A versus Team B, you get a lot of exposure. Whereas when it's PUBG, it's 16 teams, so you don't get as much exposure. Whereas I like to look at the other side of the coin and think your team is always in it. So it's always getting exposure, as opposed to exposure in one game out of 8. So you're always going to get the exposure in there. So if you've got, whatever team in there, NIP, for example, that have joined it recently, you're always going to be talking about NIP at some point in the game. So it's not like your organization is always going to get some camera time. And I know for a fact now that obviously, while it doesn't look great in America, I also know that some of the big boys are also looking at picking teams up in PUBG. So it's not the end of the world at the moment for some of the orgs out there. So there's a lot of orgs that are also looking at other options. I think, like you say, a lot of them are probably waiting to see who qualifies and picking the teams up.
I'm definitely interested in seeing how it improves the quality of PUBG Pro play, because I think sometimes you see pro players talking about how their regions or certain teams are not scrimming as much as they should, or the
James yesterday, yes.
Yeah, James from Liquid was doing some real talk on
I totally, I'm fully with him as well, because it's like, guys, and like he said it, he's like, you are paid to do this job. This starts in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time or whenever it's starting. It depends on if you're in Contenders or PEL. Contenders, I think, starts a little earlier, but this is your job. This is your job. Everyone should be working hard. I understand that they've taken a break, and some of them, God knows, they've had to take a break because they've had a long grind, but I'm fully with him. I'm with him on that one.
In terms of Pro League Europe, then, would you like to move to Berlin and be part of it?
Yeah, I mean, of course I would. I've put the best part of a year and a half plus into this game to commentate it. I'm actually almost a little sad that it's going into a league, because I like the events here, there, and everywhere. I've always liked that system that Counter-Strike uses. I don't know. League of Legends was kind of hit and miss. I think it got a little stale with the system, which is probably why they've obviously gone on and changed the system now. They've changed it to the LEC system. We'll see how that works out for them. but the problem with league formats is you do have that danger that it can become stale. And if it does, you're really stuck in a rut of how to get around it. So I'm interested to see what they're bringing to the table. We're seeing, obviously, the MPL are doing their qualifiers very differently. This is obviously a big, not only American influence, but also Korean influence, which I'm interested to see how that works with Europe as well, and what sort of different elements they'll bring to the table week in, week out with the league. Yes, obviously, I want to cast it. Hopefully, I'll be casting it. As of right now, nobody knows who's casting it.
It's genuinely
it's early
the
days.
truth. No one knows, and I do agree with you. I'm gonna miss the loads of different events, because I feel like the tone of each event was so different, which was lovely, obviously, for me, because it in a way it gave me my big esports break, being part of DreamHack Austin. That was definitely the biggest esports event I'd done at that point, and it was my third desk host. And
Your wobbly desk.
yeah, the wobble, the action cam.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a box. I didn't have an apple cart, so.
But you had a massive TV screen.
We
had a massive TV
Frankie
projector screen.
2.0, Frankie 2.0, because it's much better looking and cleverer than me. that's why I called it Frankie 2.0. But yeah, I'll keep my fingers crossed to you, mate, and I'll definitely be watching some of it, because I know that I won't be part of it, because my, as a desk host, I think they'll probably do a 2-man desk, and so they'll want someone who is potentially able to commentate as well, and to be an analyst themselves. And although I can kind of do a little bit of analysis of PUBG in a way, I'm terrible at playing the game, and I'm much better at asking questions about it. So I'm pretty much counted myself out of the running for that one. But hopefully I get to be involved in PUBG in future. Exactly, Leigh. Who knows? But
well, they've got like, I mean, they've got a big roadmap ahead of them. They got the league. They got these international events. It's not all just going to be sat in Berlin. They are bouncing around, so it's still.
So hopefully we'll get to work together again in the future.
Yes, indeed.
And before I let you go, Leigh, I want to pick your Oracle brains, because as one of the OGs of esports as we know and love it today, what do you think the future has in store for the scene?
What, for esports in general?
Yeah.
Oh, it's getting huge now, isn't it? I feel there's probably going to be a bump in the road soon. I don't know. I just get that, maybe because I've seen so many bubbles in esports come and go, or pop and disappear. I feel like there must be something, right? There must be some sort of big news. Maybe with Heroes, the Storm, and what else? There's been a few leagues that have had a little bit of a rocky road lately. Thank you, babe. So I don't know. Maybe there's something coming, but at the moment it's looking very good, right? A lot of the American orgs are going fully committed into it. I'm just a little worried where the return on investment's going to come from for some of them, and maybe we're going to see a few people pull out before it gets better.
And for you, you're seeing your future.
For me, I have no idea. Hopefully PEL. After that, years down the line, I have no idea. I'm getting old. Whether I can, I want to continue commentating as long as possible, but commentating in esports is not so much commentating, more as desk hosting, the front face, camera facing. You're not so much like a commentator as you would be in, say, real life football. Football commentators, you never see them. They're in the stands somewhere. If it was like that, I could go on till I'm grey and old. As it is, who knows?
Thank you so much, Leigh Deman Smith. This has been your esports life. Thank you so much, Leigh, for chatting to me. I feel thoroughly educated in esports now, and I'm kind of wanting to create a film or a book about the founding forefathers of the UK esports scene. Now, last year I said that Leigh was going to be recorded last year and put out last year, and it wasn't, unfortunately, although I did do my last episode with James Bardock, which was an absolute treat. So if you haven't heard that yet, go and check it out. I'm thinking I know who I'm going to be featuring next. We've got a date in the diary, but he's a very busy boy. So I don't know if it's going to go ahead or not. We know we're going to record a podcast at some point, so I'm not going to jinx it by saying who they are yet. That's all I'm going to tell you. But he's one of my favourite faces in esports. He's just an absolute darling and is one of the busiest guys out there. And I know he's going to have an absolutely phenomenal 2019. So fingers crossed I can make that happen. This year I'm going to try and get these podcasts out every 2 weeks. I might maybe even do it in seasons. So every few episodes, maybe I'll have a month off or something like that. And that's not because I want to take a month off. It's because I go away and it's hard to take everything with me to record. So, and well, edit. That's the hardest bit. It's not even the recording stuff. It's the editing stuff. So I'm going to do my best. But in the meantime, it would be absolutely amazing, cue begging, if you would tell your friends if you enjoy the podcast, leave it a review and a rating on iTunes if that's the platform you're listening to, and genuinely put it about on the internet, because this is still quite a small podcast, I will say. And the nicest thing is when I get messages from listeners saying that they enjoy it. So thank you to each and every one of you who's been in touch, and I definitely want to keep it going. Don't worry, I'm not thinking of ending it anytime soon, but I am thinking of ending this particular episode because I know I've been yabbering on for quite a while. So thank you ever so much for listening. As I said, please spread the word. It would mean the world to me, and hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks I'll be back with the next episode. So until next time, adios.